upon a time there was a site. I actually do not recall the name of it, nor could I find it for this rumination. Sorry, guys. I actually looked quite a while. I found another site, which I'll refer to in a second. This site was a place where you could go and vote for a relative ranking, basically between 1 and 10, of all the episodes of Voyager, and I mean all of them. It was a really cool site. I liked it. It was a great way to kind of see what the other fans thought, and I just can't find it. I have no idea where it is. Shrug. I mentioned this because I recall Spirit Folk being towards the bottom of that list, and I was curious where it actually lied, and I couldn't find it. I did find another list, though. Another list which gives its own opinion of where it is ranking-wise. To give you just an idea of this, the bottom 10, from 10 being the least worst to 1 being the worst are, therefore, in order, Cathexis, Parturition, Fairhaven, Elogium, The Shoot, Threshold, Sacred Ground, The Fight, Spirit Folk, and 1159. So in other words, according to this particular site, the Spirit Folk is the second worst episode of Voyager. Better than Threshold. You'll notice Q and the Grey isn't even on this list. Also, The Shoot is on this list, which actually I rather liked. And 1159. I don't know what to make of that. But then again, if you look at their best list, Dreadnought's on that list. So I suppose we've got a little bit of an eyebrow raise. And so is Blink of an Eye. And Prototype. And Projections. Distant Origins there, though. I'm okay with that. Anyways. I just mention it because even though I disagree with this personal thing and I couldn't find the actual list that I was looking for, and it's going to bother me. If anybody out there can find that list of all the Voyager episodes, all ranked. I believe it was more than just Voyager stuff. It was like a bunch of stuff there. But if you can find that site, please feel free to mention it to me, because that's going to bug me. And this episode I'm recording now doesn't come out for like a month, by my perspective, so I'm going to be bothered for a while by this, but whatever. Point being, even if I don't agree with the aggregate, this is not what I would call a good episode. So I don't actually have much to say about it. I could rip it to shreds. I could just absolutely destroy this episode. Instead, I'm going to focus on a few specific things. I mean, first of all, 6 weeks. I actually mentioned this back in Fairhaven. They said it's going to take 6 or so weeks in order to repair the program. This episode aired 6 or so weeks later. It's a very minor touch, but it is something that I think does deserve praise. 2 thoughts came to my mind, well, 3 actually, but the third one requires more discussion. So 2 quick thoughts came to mind when I was watching this episode. First of all, anyone out there seen The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street? If you haven't, I highly recommend it. I don't know if you can just watch it on YouTube or whatever, but seriously, go look it up. The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. It is an episode of The Twilight Zone. One of the better episodes of The Twilight Zone, in my opinion. Not the best, but it's up there. It's some good stuff. And I was reminded of that because one of the things that the episode actually does correctly, one of the very, very few points of good writing in this episode, is when they point out, you know, they're giving all of their evidence about how these people are clearly spared folk. They've come to bewitch us and kill us and do all sorts of horrible things. All of the evidence they give, with one exception, is a positive. Something that they did to change the program in order to better benefit the people in the program. You know, oh my god, my child's fallen. Oh no, it's weather. You know, that's not what I would call good evidence. And they dissolve into basically a mob. And then at the end of the episode, they call back to that, and he points out several of the examples that were already given, saying, hey, they definitely have these great powers and this great technology, but they use it for our benefit, you morons. The other thing I thought, pretty quickly and succinctly when I was watching this, is, haven't we done this story before? I mean, obviously we haven't done the Irish town is somehow a threat to the ship, and I'm going to just go off on that subject in a moment. But we've done the holodeck characters become aware of the fact that they're on the holodeck and trying to explore the reality of that. Now, let's take a moment away here. The idea of, for lack of a better way to put it, a video game character becoming self-aware of the fact that they're in a video game is an interesting topic. It is so interesting, I have actually had extensive ethical and moral discussions with my sister about this exact topic. Because it's an interesting thought, right? At what point do you draw the line on rights or availability? At what point are you going too far with regards to alterations to the program or anything like that? How much should they be considered? Whatever, all these things. I mean, there are actually other works that have done this. There's actually a webcomic. It's actually my favorite webcomic of all time, called Captain SNES. I know that sounds funny, but it's really good. Very, very lore-centric and lots of really good holy crap moments in the story. But in that, one of the main plot points, and I'm kind of giving something away, so I'm going to say this in a non-spoiler way, just on the off chance you want to go read the webcomic, Captain SNES, is, it's the second time I've plugged a webcomic recently, is one of the characters of one of the video games that is in the webcomic. So, to use it in perspective, within the confines of the story, there are video games, and you can, like, enter the video games, and in one of the video games, one of the characters became aware that they were in a video game, and it kind of basically completely snapped them. They just, and didn't go what I would call completely insane, but it definitely changed their worldview in many, many different ways. And they explored that. They explored that topic. They looked at that. It was an interesting topic. One of the more interesting points he brings up is my beloved was died horribly in order to save my life because some asshole decided it would make the story more interesting. I had to suffer all that pain and misery for the sake of an engaging plot. I mean, oh my God. So it's an interesting concept. But again, we've done this before. On Star Trek, even. We did this, I mean, at the very least, we did this in what I believe was the second or third, I forget when it was, one of the earliest TNG holodeck episodes. And that just says something about how accessible of a plot idea this is. That one of the first things they did with the holodeck, ever, was examine what it would be like if the holodeck characters became aware. And there's that scene where the holodeck character asks Picard, what happens when you leave this room? And Picard says, I don't know. And then he leaves. That wasn't exactly a great episode either, but, you get my point. So why are we doing this again? Now, of course, I know the answer to that, and I've brought this up several times with regards to Voyager, because they keep recycling TNG episodes, and I don't fully blame the writers for this, but they really should have probably brought in some fresh blood and really probably tried to work in different directions with Voyager, rather than, same course ahead, I think I'm going to blow up on this episode next. I think that's where we'll go with this. Lord knows I've talked before about the difficulty from a writing perspective of challenging the main characters. Whether they're heroes or villains, doesn't matter. Challenging the main characters is one of the hardest things to do as a writer, because you want to hit a balance point. You want them to be challenged because you want them to overcome challenges, but you also don't want them to just completely curb stop everything. But you also don't want to Deus Ex Machina everything, but you also don't want them to be... You see the problem here. There's so many different ways this can go wrong. If you have a main characters and they're facing something completely overwhelming, something that by all rights should absolutely destroy them, the Deus Ex Machina is one of the only ways to get out of that situation. I mean, you don't understand what I mean? By contrast, though, if you give the heroes or the main characters too many tools in their arsenal, then things get too easy, and then it's very difficult to make things challenge them at all. And that has been one of Star Trek's problems for years. This has been something that's bothered me ever since I was a kid. Even when I was very young, still watching TNG as it came out on the terrible television with the little extra bit of aluminum wrapping to make the reception better. Nostalgia. Those days sucked. But point being, even when I was watching that on the set with my mom sitting next to me, there were times when they would basically artificially make the crew, like make something challenging when it shouldn't be. And I'm like, they're on the frickin' Enterprise. This isn't a threat to them. And I'd say that, and Mom would just be like, yes, I know. But I've talked about this before because this is a problem in Voyager. And I've pointed out when they do it right, when they use a creative way to make something a challenge. This episode is on the opposite end of that bell curve. The challenge they're facing here... Okay, I have a bit of a headache right now, and I'm actually getting upset enough that it's making the headache worse. This is not a joke. The challenge they're facing right now, in this episode, is that a bunch of yokels and stereotypes who don't even know, like, the full complexity of what a car is, are holding members of the Intrepid class Voyager of Doom hostage on their own holodeck because the holodeck malfunctioned because it was shot with a frickin' rifle. That's the... I'd like to give credit to the writers. They even mention the possibility of beaming them off the holodeck. But there's this scene that that you know the scene. It's in many works of fiction. It's called the "We're So Powerless" scene. And the purpose of the "We're So Powerless" scene is to drive the plot in the direction of where the writers want it to go. In other words, they want this solution to be the one that unfolds. So first they have to discuss all the other solutions and why they can't do them. Hence the "We're So Powerless." And during the "We're So Powerless" scene, they're going down the list of things they can't do. And one of them is we can't beam them off because there's too many photons. So, let's just get this straight. I know. You're going to yell at me, but just... We've got the cliche of the technologically inferior holding the technologically superior hostage. We've got the cliche of the transporters not working. We've got the cliche of the holodeck malfunctioning. And you could argue we also are living in the cliche of the self-aware AI thing, if you want to add that to the list. And all of this is designed to generate a threat, which is never actually realized because they never actually do anything threatening. Unless you count flinging stereotypes to be threatening. And I hate to keep bashing that stereotype thing, but it's just because I hate this episode. Normally I'm willing to overlook that kind of crap, but what the hell? What? None of the incredible tools that the team of Voyager has, that just about any starship in modern Star Trek has at their disposal, the many, many, many different things they can do to make the situation better. And they're powerless? Now, the one and only option they discuss is shutting down the program. And shutting down the program would naturally mean losing the program forever. I mentioned before how that makes a degree of sense, how they might lose some of the data of the program, because, I mean, you shut down, you know, if you pull the power plug on your computer in the middle of something, it's going to be wonky when you come back, right? Here's the thing. Last I checked, if you're in the middle of, I don't know, working on Adobe Premiere, which is what I use for editing my videos, and you're in the middle of working on something, and you pull the power plug, Adobe Premiere doesn't go away. Even the files you were editing don't go away. You'll probably lose all progress, and it might screw with a few things, and you'll have to do a couple of checks on your hard drive, and you might lose a couple of files, maybe. But you don't lose Adobe Premiere, do you? The idea that pulling the plug on the holodeck is going to permanently get rid of the Fairhaven program is ludicrous in every single way. If this is the level of software sophistication the Federation has, I am flippin' amazed the Ferengi haven't sent them one of those click this for a virus programs and just defeated the entirety of Starfleet. Because this is ridiculous. I'm not actually yelling because I do have a headache. I'm not joking about that. And I love how the computer... Like, I'd like to call it creative that the computer partially fritzes out. You know, computer freeze program. Some of them freeze. Computer exit. No, I'm not going to open the exit. Why? Of all the things that could malfunction on the holodeck, why is the exit not opening one of them? Why is that even on the list? That's like saying, oh my god, my radio's broken down in my car and now I can't open the door. So we've got like a 5-layer artificial situation to try and engineer some kind of tension. And that brings me to my big problem with this episode. Because I told you we'd get to it. The third thing from earlier. This episode can't decide what it wants to do. Or what it wants to be. I feel like the directors and the writers and the editors all disagreed on what the tone of this episode should be. And so it comes across like an episode of Simpsons almost. Or South Park or something. You know how... South Park's a better example. You know how many times in South Park they've been, like, doing this deep, serious, emotional scene because their friend's iPhone is dying, and the friend's on the iPhone, you know, he's voice chatting with them or whatever. You know, that's kind of the thing, the feel I get from this episode, because it tries to be serious, and it tries to be a deep examination, and then it tries to be deadly, and oh my gosh, and then it tries to be silly and comical, and then it does both in the same scene. And it's so distorting. Like, you can do that kind of juxtaposition. It works. It has worked in the past. But this episode clearly was just, again, everyone involved in the making of it disagreeing with what the tone of the episode should be. So it just kind of does this. The whole episode just does this. If you're going to do a serious examination of AI and self-awareness and video games and all that stuff, do it. If you're going to do a comedy piece, do it. If you're going to do a dangerous, you know, oh my god, we're all in danger plot, do it. Don't throw all three in the blender along with a rock and see what happens. Now, I will give credit where credit is due. Janeway hits the nail on the head in this episode. She actually says what I said back in Fairhaven. Fairhaven may not be real, but the feelings it has engendered in us are real. And I'm not going to allow those relationships and whatnot to go away just because, you know, if we have another alternative. That's probably the one really good line in the entire work, and I do like that. I do like the perspective she takes on that, and I agree with her even. I have a couple other random thoughts here. Hypnosis? Really? I get the how it works thing. It's because his program was integrated into the program, so he is therefore subject to the laws of the program, even though that doesn't actually even begin to make sense. That's like saying every time the Doctor, without his emitter, transited to another program, he just suddenly gets morphed into that new program's set of rules, if you will. Which we've actually seen demonstrated is not true. Before he got the emitter, every time he went to the holodeck, that was not true. It's also kind of a stupid idea to begin with, but I'm not even going to go into that. So, I mean, hypnosis? Really? Really? Speaking of the Doctor, this episode actually probably does a better job of showcasing the Doctor's entertainment than anyone else. Let me explain what I mean by that. How many of you have stress in your lives? Now, if any of you didn't raise your hands, you're a liar. But, okay, so we have forms of entertainment to de-stress, right? I mean, that's kind of normal. I don't want to lean this way. I want to lean this way. Oh, there we go. Oh, that's better. I'm trying to stretch my back out to help the headache go away. So you have stress in your life. And one of the things we tend to do, I know this sounds weird, but we tend to do things like watch TV. Like watch the latest Star Trek episode. Or we tend to watch some random idiot yammering on about a Star Trek episode. The point being, we do stuff to entertain ourselves, but one of the main actual functions that serves other than entertainment is de-stressing. And one of the ways we can de-stress is by venting, right? I bring this up because while certainly we see several characters who have, you know, entertainment and derive enjoyment from the Fairhaven program, I feel like the Doctor gets the most out of it. Remember, he's still kind of stuck in, like, he's trying to gear shift in his character arc, and so he's kind of stuck in neutral in this one particular aspect of his character arc, and he's been stuck in it for a while and will continue to be stuck in it for a while, actually, until the payoff later. We'll get to that when we get there. But when we get to that, up until we get to that episode, the Doctor's just stuck in this holographic characters' rights movement kind of a thing, okay? And this has come up many times previous to, and will come up again after this, about, you know, just because, you know, I'm a holographic character does not make me a different person, blah, 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 blah. And he actually says that force fields and photons line that he's used before. But I'm only making fun of the writers here because they can't seem to write anything else for the Doctor. It's like they ran out of ideas for what the Doctor could do and they just stuck on this point. But from an in-character perspective, it does make a lot of sense that the Doctor, who is, at this point in time with his character, frustrated with that, would go vent somewhere about it. But you don't vent to your friends, do you? Keeping in mind, as the Doctor later will say, he doesn't actually feel oppressed on Voyager. Quite the contrary, he actually feels like he is a person on Voyager. And this has been re-emphasized many times over and over. Not counting that frickin' singing episode we just passed, but you get my point. It is clear that he does not feel like the people who he would normally rant to are the source of his problem. So it's logical he wouldn't vent to them. You understand that concept, don't you? I mean, you have friends, but you don't want to go to your friends and say, I hate this, and this is the problem, when they're not the source of that problem, are they? You don't want to burden them with your problems, do you? Maybe you do, I don't know, but that's the way several people I know think. So instead he goes to the holodeck, and he starts ranting about how they're your neighbors, and you should take care of them, and the substance of who they are doesn't matter, and blah, 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 blah. And he just kind of slides that bit in there. I get the feeling the Doctor has been using Fairhaven as a venting source so that he can safely, easily, without causing any distress or harm to anyone else, just kind of vent his feelings. And isn't that one of the better uses of video games in general? It's one of the reasons I vent at the, if I can use a parallel, about the Horde Alliance thing so much over on WoW. It bothers me, admittedly, but I tend to rant about it and vent about it because it's so stupid when two groups of people who have no real reason to be fighting each other are constantly fighting each other. And if you can't understand the real-life parallels in that one... Final note, and I know this is a weird thing to end on, but I want to end on a positive note. I know, it's weird. It's this new and uncertain thing. Positivity on my show. This episode confirmed something a lot of viewers had thought about for a long time. Now, I went digging. I have a feeling that someone's going to hop on here and prove me wrong. But I did actually research this prior to sitting down and recording this, and I couldn't find anything. Granted, I couldn't find that site either, so maybe I'm just terrible. But this is the first time the perception filters are mentioned. Now, I use the perception filters in a lot of my discussions about Holodeck and Holodeck characters and Holodeck creations. And I'll be talking about the perception filters when we get over to TNG. Because the very existence of something like perception filter is such a logical thing that makes perfect sense within the Holodeck's confines to make so much of it work. For those of you who don't understand, the point is the Holodeck program actively alters the way you think to change the way you perceive things. So you're not so the Holodeck characters are not literally seeing things as the way they are. They're seeing things through a perception filter, so that they're seeing things within their how they should. This explains how so many times, Voyager characters will come on, and they'll call for the Arch, and no one will notice. They'll talk into their comm badges, and no one will notice. They'll wear unusual uniforms, and people will just comment on how silly they look. None of them will actually go, oh my god, or actually react like a character in their particular time period or in their particular fiction would because of that perception filter. I actually have another theory attached to this, which I consider a strong theory, about when the perception filters were a thing. And again, we'll talk about that over in TNG. But again, to my knowledge, this episode, Spirit Folk, Season 6 of Voyager, is the first time they actually mention perception filters in this show. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. So I want to say one positive thing about this episode. It gave us the confirmation of that concept that so many of us had theorized prior to now. The idea that there is some kind of web over the characters, making it so they see things properly. And I like that idea, because it's a perfect solution to the puzzle problem of the thing. You can, of course, get all in uniform. I mean, how many times did O'Brien and Bashir get into uniform for the various holodeck programs they would do over on Deep Space Nine, right? But you don't have to, because there's just as many times we see someone go on in their uniform, in something completely that doesn't fit at all with the particular area. And occasionally the holodeck characters will make a comment on it, but that's it. You don't have to dress the part, because the program will deal with the rest of that. And that is good design from an in-character perspective, from an in-lore perspective. That's actually good programming. It's funny, because the holodecks in general are some of the most horrifyingly badly programmed things ever. There's a reason the holodeck malfunction is considered a tired trope at this point in time. Also, they had holodecks on Enterprise, because... Anyways, That's all I got. Hope you enjoyed. Sorry for the rant. I'm going to go try and nurse this headache. I'll see you around, guys.